Hello and welcome back everyone. Sorry for the long pause. Residency is taking a big chunk of my time, but I'm finally back and I'm going to be explaining pathology related topics in the next videos. So this video will mark the first chapter of general pathology, which is cellular adaptations, cell injury and cell death. And in this video we will start with the cellular adaptations, also known as the growth adaptations. So those will include hypertrophy, hyperplasia, atrophy, and metaplasia. And before we explain each one of them, we have to understand some essential points. So body organs are in homeostasis with the normal stress that's placed on them. Let's take the heart for example. So the heart is in homeostasis with the amount of blood that it has to push through the peripheral vascular resistance into the systemic circulation. So the heart is in homeostasis with the stress placed on it. But there is occasions when there is increase, decrease, or change in stress on an organ. That's for the organ to adapt, that it has to undergo cellular adaptations, also known as growth adaptations. Now, cellular adaptations are reversible changes in the cell size, number, function, metabolic activity, etc. And those changes are caused by stress in the environment. And those adaptations can be physiologic or pathologic. Physiologic is caused by the body normal physiology, such as the growth that occur in the uterus in pregnancy. It is considered as a physiologic cellular adaptation induced by hormones, which is the estrogen. Another example is the growth that occur in muscles and bones due to mechanical stress. That is also considered a physiologic cellular adaptation. On the other hand, pathologic adaptations are caused by some pathology in the body, such as the change that occur in the respiratory epithelium from the columnar into the stratified squamous, which is considered metaplasia, that occur in smoking. It is considered as a pathologic cellular adaptation. Let's start by discussing the first cellular adaptation, and that is the hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is increase in cell size that result in increase in the organ size. Now, hypertrophy commonly occur with another cellular adaptation, and that is hyperplasia. Hyperplasia is increased in cell number, and that will be discussed next. Now, hypertrophy and hyperplasia occur together in almost all of the tissues inside the human body except for the permanent tissues. In permanent tissues, pure hypertrophy occurs, meaning only hypertrophy occurs to increase the organ size. Now, the permanent tissues include the skeletal muscle, the nerves, and the heart muscle. And the permanent tissues are tissues that can't divide. So because they can't divide, they cannot undergo hyperplasia. So they only can undergo hypertrophy in case there is increase in stress. Now again, hypertrophy is increase in cell size and it is caused by increase in stress. So when there is increase in stress on a specific tissue, this will lead to hypertrophy. Now, hypertrophy can be physiologic or pathologic. Physiologic, such as in pregnancy, the uterus muscle will undergo hypertrophy and hyperplasia at the same time to provide the strength required to carry the growing baby. Pathologic, such as in hypertension, because there is increase in stress that is coming from increased the peripheral vascular resistance on the heart. This will require the heart to pump blood with a higher pressure, and the heart is a permanent tissue, meaning it cannot divide, so it cannot undergo hyperplasia, meaning it will grow only by hypertrophy to provide the strength needed to push the blood against the high peripheral vascular resistance, or maybe against a stenosed aortic valve. In this picture here, you can see hypertrophy of the muscle of the left ventricle in the heart. The right ventricle here look normal. Now, the mechanism by which hypertrophy occurs, for example, in the cardiac muscle in the heart, hypertrophy occurs when there is stretch in the cardiac muscle. That means it occurs when the heart muscle is stretching due to increase the blood inside it. So the mechanism by which this occurs is by release of mediators that stimulate cell growth. And those mediators include growth factors and hormones. Those will turn on signal transduction that would induce the expression of genes that encode for number of cellular proteins, and one result is the synthesis of myofilaments, which increases the force generated with each contraction. And this will lead to the cell meeting its increased work demands. All the cells have cytoskeleton. So for example, if we have this cell here, it has a cytoskeleton that will give the cell its shape and keep it together. So for the cell to undergo hypertrophy, the cytoskeleton has also to become bigger for it to work. And one of the contents of the cytoskeleton is the myofilaments. Now, other mechanisms for hypertrophy is the switch of contractile proteins from the adult to fetal or neonatal forms. For example, the switch of alpha myosin heavy chains to beta myosin heavy chains. And this will produce a slower and stronger contractions. Now, hypertrophy, as we mentioned, is caused by increase in stress. Now, pathologic hypertrophy, if not relieved, it can progress to cell injury and cell death. Meaning this stress, if it's still increasing, it can lead to cell injury and cell death because there is limits to what the organ can handle. For example, in the heart, if there is increase in stress, it will undergo hypertrophy. If this stress is keep increasing into a level that the heart can't handle, in that case, the cardiac muscles start dying, and this will result in heart failure. Moving on to the next cellular adaptation, and that is hyperplasia. Hyperplasia is increase in the number of cells in an organ, and hyperplasia occur because of increase in stress. Hyperplasia can occur in differentiated cells, and it can also occur in progenitor cells. Those are the cells are not yet differentiated. And the mechanism of hyperplasia is that the tissue is induced by the hormones and the growth factors to undergo this cellular adaptation. Hyperplasia can be physiologic or pathologic. Examples of physiologic hyperplasia is in the glandular tissue of the female breast during puberty. It undergoes hyperplasia that is influenced by the hormonal stimulation. Another physiologic example is the compensatory hyperplasia that occur in the liver. In case part of the liver is resected, the other part will undergo hyperplasia to get the liver back into its normal volume. That is because the hepatocytes are quiescent cells and they can enter the cell cycle after 12 hours when a part of the liver is resected. And that is influenced by the growth factors secreted by the uninjured hepatocytes. Example for the pathologic hyperplasia is the endometrial hyperplasia caused by unopposed hormonal stimulation caused by estrogen that will lead to endometrial hyperplasia. That will lead to this condition, and this will lead to uterine bleeding. Also, the benign prostatic hyperplasia that occur due to the androgen and estrogen hormones. Now, it is important to differentiate the pathologic hyperplasia from cancer. Now, the pathologic hyperplasia, it is responsive to the regulatory signal. If the signal stops, the hyperplasia stops. But in cancer, the cancer is unresponsive to the regulatory signal, meaning if the signal is cut, it will keep growing. And pathologic hyperplasia can progress to cancer, such as in the endometrial hyperplasia. It can progress to endometrial cancer. Now moving on to the next cellular adaptation, and that is atrophy. Atrophy is reduced organ size caused by reduction in cell size and number of cells. And atrophy can be caused by decreased blood supply, denervation, which is loss of the nerve signal to a specific organ. Also can be caused by decrease in nutrients, decreased hormonal stimulation, or aging, which is senile atrophy. And these causes can be further classified as physiologic, such as senile atrophy and decreased hormonal stimulation in menopause, and it can be classified as pathologic, such as denervation, which is loss of the nerve signal, or loss of the blood supply. Now, the mechanism by which atrophy occurs include a combination of decreased protein synthesis and increased protein degradation. Now, decreased protein synthesis is caused by reduced metabolic activity, and protein degradation occur mainly by the ubiquitin proteasome pathway. The idea here is that the ubiquitin is like a dye that will act as a target for the proteasome, which will engulf the proteins. So the ubiquitin will act as a dye and it will go on different proteins in the cell and it will act as a dye on them. So it will be a target for the proteasome. So the proteasome, which is an organelle that will eat the proteins. So it will target the ubiquitin dyed proteins and it will engulf them and it will degrade them. Now, atrophy is also accompanied by increased autophagy. Autophagy is when the cell eats its own components. So the cell will consume its own components by the autophagy, and this will give the cell energy to keep surviving in case there is a nutrient deficiency or other reasons. Now moving on to the final cellular adaptation, which is metaplasia. Metaplasia is a change in which one adult cell type is replaced by another adult cell type, and it is caused by a change in stress. So a change in stress on a specific tissue in the body will make it undergo metaplasia. The mechanism of metaplasia is by reprogramming of stem cells to produce another cell type than the original cell type. Examples of metaplasia include the respiratory epithelium metaplasia from ciliated columnar to stratified squamous epithelium due to prolonged cigarette smoking. Now, cigarette smoke acts as a noxious chemical that would harm the ciliated columnar epithelium. In that case, this epithelium will undergo metaplasia to stratified squamous, which is a tougher epithelium, and it will be able to handle the cigarette smoking well. But this will lead to the loss of the mucus secretion and the ciliated clearance of mucus. So it will lead to the loss of protective mechanisms of the respiratory system. Metaplasia can also occur in the esophagus. Exactly in the lower esophagus, it can undergo metaplasia from stratified squamous into intestinal type columnar epithelium, and that is due to chronic gastric reflux. Now, if we have the esophagus here and the stomach here we have the esophageal gastric sphincter. This will keep the acidic stomach fluid from refluxing back into the esophagus. But in case this sphincter is malfunctioning, this will result in the stomach fluid refluxing back into the lower esophagus, and the lower esophagus is not made to handle this stress, so it will undergo metaplasia to intestinal type columnar epithelium, which is the same epithelium found in the stomach, meaning it will be able to handle the acidic reflux. And this will end up into the transformation into Barrett esophagus, which is considered a precancerous lesion. In this picture, you can see this transformation. First, we have the stratified squamous that is normally present in the esophagus, but then you have the metaplastic epithelium, which is the columnar type, and you can see that it has glands, which is clearly mean that's an intestinal type columnar epithelium. Another example for metaplasia is keratomalacia. Now, to understand this, you have to know that vitamin A is very necessary for the differentiation of a specialized epithelium in the body, and that is the conjunctiva. The conjunctiva is a specialized transparent epithelium in the eye, and for it to work, it has to be transparent and it needs vitamin A to achieve that. But in case we have vitamin A deficiency, we get the keratomalacia, which is also called the night blindness. In that condition, we have squamous epithelium of the conjunctiva undergoing metaplasia to stratified keratinizing squamous epithelium, which will make the conjunctiva from transparent into non-transparent, meaning you can't see through it, such as you can see in this picture here. The last example is myositis ossificans. Myositis ossificans occur when there is a trauma to a muscle tissue. The muscle tissue may undergo metaplasia into a bone. In that case, we call it myositis ossificans. Such as you can see in this picture here, this is a muscle tissue metaplasia into a bone. Now, metaplasia can undergo malignant transformation, and that is in case the causes that led to metaplasia are persistent, then it may predispose to malignant transformation, such as in columnar metaplasia of the esophagus. It can progress into Barrett esophagus, and Barrett esophagus can result in malignant transformation. Same applies to the metaplasia of the respiratory epithelium in smoking.